Welcome back to another episode of Infidelity Tales Lab. We're thankful for your continued viewership. Before we begin, tell us, where in the world are you watching from? We love knowing our global reach. Now, let's dive into today's story. Chapter 1. The Foundation of Deceit. Blake Morrison adjusted his Italian silk tie as he stood before the floor-to-ceiling windows of his downtown Seattle office, watching the morning fog roll across Elliott Bay. At 38, he commanded Morrison Security Solutions, a private military contracting firm he'd built from nothing after leaving the Rangers 10 years ago. His penetrating gray eyes and controlled demeanor had earned him respect in boardrooms and fear in back alleys across 3 continents. The intercom buzzed. "Mr. Morrison, your wife called. She wanted to remind you about dinner tonight." Blake's jaw tightened imperceptibly. Tiffany had been different lately. Distant, secretive, always on her phone. After 12 years of marriage, he knew every tell, every micro-expression. Something was coming. He'd met Tiffany Caldwell at a charity gala when she was 23, fresh from University of Washington with a marketing degree and dreams bigger than her small-town Oregon upbringing. She was beautiful in that carefully crafted way. Platinum blonde hair, designer clothes, a smile that could stop traffic. Blake had been drawn to her ambition, mistaking her calculating nature for intelligence. Their early years had been a whirlwind of success. Blake's military connections and Tiffany's social climbing had created a power couple that dominated Seattle's elite circles. She'd wanted the mansion in Bellevue, the vacation home in Aspen, the yacht. Blake had provided it all, believing he was building something lasting. But Tiffany had always been hungry for more than just money. She craved attention, validation, the thrill of conquest. Blake had noticed her wandering eyes at parties, the way she flirted with younger men when she thought he wasn't watching. He'd chosen to trust rather than investigate, a mistake he was beginning to regret. That evening, Blake arrived home to their 8,000-square-foot estate to find Tiffany in the kitchen, wearing a black cocktail dress that cost more than most people's cars. She was nervous, fidgeting with her wedding ring, a tell he'd cataloged years ago. "We need to talk," she said, not meeting his eyes. Blake set down his briefcase and studied her. In his line of work, reading people was survival. Tiffany's body language screamed guilt and fear, but also something else, anticipation. "I've been thinking about our marriage," she continued, finally looking up. "About what I need to be happy." "And what's that, Tiffany?" She took a breath, as if gathering courage. "I need space to explore other relationships. I want to see other men for a while. We can still be married, still make love, but I need more." Blake's expression didn't change, but inside, something cold and final clicked into place. He'd survived Taliban ambushes, cartel assassins, and corporate boardroom backstabbing. He'd built an empire through calculated violence and unwavering discipline. But this casual destruction of everything he'd built triggered something darker. "Other men," he repeated calmly. "It doesn't mean I don't love you. But I married young, Blake. I never got to experience." "Who is he?" Tiffany's eyes widened. "What?" "The man you're already fucking." "Who is he?" Her carefully rehearsed speech crumbled. "Blake, Derek Hamilton." Blake's voice was flat, emotionless. "Your college boyfriend. The one who played guitar at that coffee shop near campus. The one you said you lost touch with when we met." Tiffany's face went white. "How did you?" "I know everything, Tiffany. The hotel receipts, the burner phone, the fact that he's been living in Portland for the past 6 months, conveniently close enough for weekend trips." Blake stepped closer, and she instinctively backed against a marble counter. "The question is, did you really think I was stupid enough not to find out?" "Blake, please. You want to see other men?" Blake's smile was razor thin. "Then see them." Without another word, he walked upstairs to their bedroom and began packing a single suitcase. Tiffany followed, tears streaming down her face, but Blake ignored her pleas. He took only what he needed, some clothes, important documents, and a few sentimental items from his military service. "Where are you going?" she asked. "Away." Blake turned at the bedroom door. "Enjoy your exploration, Tiffany. I hope it's everything you dreamed it would be." He drove to a secure storage facility he maintained across town, one of several contingency locations he'd established over the years. Old habits from his military days. Always have an exit strategy, always have backup plans. But Blake Morrison wasn't running. He was repositioning. From his laptop in the sterile storage unit office, he accessed bank accounts Tiffany didn't know existed, activated surveillance protocols he'd installed in their home years ago for security purposes, and began making phone calls to very specific people who owed him very specific favors. Tiffany wanted to explore? He'd give her an adventure she'd never forget. By midnight, Blake had a complete dossier on Derek Hamilton. 36 years old, divorced, struggling musician who'd never quite made it beyond Seattle's bar circuit. Currently 3 months behind on rent for his dingy Portland apartment, with a gambling problem that had cost him his last real job and mounting debts to some very unforgiving people. Most interesting of all, Derek Hamilton had no idea that Tiffany Morrison was worth $30 million. Blake leaned back in his chair and smiled for the first time in weeks. This was going to be beautiful. Chapter 2. The Spider's Web. 3 days after Blake's departure, Tiffany Morrison stood in her empty mansion, staring at the note he'd left on the kitchen counter. Wire transfer confirmations in the safe. Enjoy spending our money with Derek. She'd rushed to their bank that morning, only to discover that Blake had cleaned out their joint accounts. Legally, methodically, leaving her with just a household account containing enough for basic expenses. $30 million vanished overnight into offshore holdings she couldn't touch. The panic set in when she realized the house payments, the car leases, the credit cards, everything was tied to accounts Blake controlled. She called Derek in hysterics. "Baby, slow down." Derek's voice crackled through her phone. "You're telling me your husband just disappeared with all your money?" "Not disappeared. He knows about us, Derek. He knows everything." Tiffany paced the marble foyer, her heels clicking frantically. "We need to be careful. Blake isn't. He's not a normal businessman. He's dangerous." Derek Hamilton sat in his cramped Portland apartment, trying to process this information. For 3 months, he'd been having the best sex of his life with his college girlfriend, now a wealthy housewife looking for excitement. She'd been flying down to Portland twice a week, showering him with expensive gifts, talking about leaving her husband for him. He'd never asked too many questions about Blake Morrison. All he knew was that the man was older, successful, and apparently oblivious to his wife's affair. Derek had actually felt a little sorry for the guy. "So what happens now?" Derek asked. "I don't know. Maybe this is our chance. Maybe this is the universe telling us to be together." Derek looked around his shitty apartment, at the overdue bills stacked on his coffee table, at the guitar he'd been trying to sell just to make rent. "Tiff, if your husband took all the money, I'll figure something out. I always do." What Tiffany didn't know was that Derek Hamilton was already figuring something out. That morning, he'd received a very interesting phone call from a man claiming to represent certain financial interests in Portland. They wanted to discuss Derek's gambling debts, all $47,000 of them. The meeting was set for that afternoon at a warehouse near the docks. Derek arrived to find 3 men waiting for him. The one in the expensive suit introduced himself as Mr. Chun, though Derek suspected that wasn't his real name. "Mr. Hamilton, you owe my associates a considerable sum. Look, I told Russo I'd have his money by the end of the month. Mr. Russo sold your debt to us. We're less patient than he was." Chun smiled coldly. "However, we have a proposition that might interest you." Derek swallowed hard. "What kind of proposition?" "We understand you're romantically involved with a very wealthy woman. Tiffany Morrison, wife of Blake Morrison." Derek's blood turned to ice. "How do you?" "That's irrelevant. What matters is that Mrs. Morrison has access to significant assets, and you have access to Mrs. Morrison. We propose a simple transaction. You help us acquire those assets, and your debt is forgiven, plus a substantial bonus. I can't just steal from Tiffany. I care about her." Chin's smile vanished. "Mr. Hamilton, you seem to misunderstand the nature of your situation. This isn't a negotiation. You will convince Mrs. Morrison to provide us with access to her husband's assets, or we will be forced to collect your debt through other means." He gestured to his companions, and Derek noticed the bulges under their jackets. "How am I supposed to get access to Blake Morrison's money? The guy's like some kind of military contractor. Those people don't just leave their finances lying around. That's your problem to solve. You have 1 week." That evening, Derek called Tiffany with a new urgency in his voice. We need to meet. In person. Tonight. They met at a hotel in Seattle, the same one where they'd been conducting their affair for months. But this time, Derek had an agenda beyond sex. Tiff, I've been thinking about what you said. About this being our chance to be together. Tiffany curled up against his chest. I meant it, Derek. I'm tired of living Blake's life. I want to live mine. What if I told you there was a way to get back at him? To take control of your own future? What do you mean? Derek had spent the drive to Seattle crafting his pitch. Your husband thinks he's so smart, disappearing with all the money. But he made one mistake. He left you in that house. With access to his office, his files, his computer. Tiffany pulled back to look at him. Derek, Blake's computer is password protected, encrypted. It's like Fort Knox. But you know him better than anyone. You know his habits, his passwords, his security systems. Derek's hands moved to her shoulders. We could find out where he's hiding the money. We could expose his business dealings. A guy like that, in his line of work, he's got to have secrets he doesn't want coming to light. What Derek didn't know was that every word of their conversation was being recorded through the hotel room's compromised electronics, transmitted in real time to a man sitting in a storage facility across town. Blake Morrison leaned back in his chair, listening to his wife and her lover plan to betray him. The rage he felt was cold, calculated, the kind of anger that had made him legendary among military contractors who dealt with the world's worst people. He picked up a secure phone and dialed. Rodriguez? It's Morrison. I need you to activate the Portland protocol. Yes, all of it. No, there won't be any loose ends when this is over. Through his earpiece, he heard Derek Hamilton telling his wife how much he loved her, how they'd run away together once they got Blake's money. Blake smiled in the darkness. They had no idea what they'd just set in motion. By the time Tiffany and Derek were done making plans to destroy his life, Blake had already put their destruction into motion. The pieces were moving, the web was spinning, and soon they'd both discover what happened to people who tried to betray Blake Morrison. Soon, they'd learn why his enemies called him the Ghost. Chapter 3. The Trap Springs. Blake Morrison watched from his car as Derek Hamilton stumbled out of the warehouse district at 2 a.m., blood trickling from his nose and terror etched across his face. The three men Blake had hired to play debt collectors had done their job perfectly, escalating Derek's desperation to the breaking point. Phase 1 was complete. Derek now believed he was trapped between Tiffany's wealth and violent criminals who would kill him if he didn't deliver Blake's assets within 4 days. What Derek didn't know was that Blake had paid off his real gambling debts months ago, then created fictional ones with fictional people who were very real former Special Forces operators. Blake drove to a secure apartment he maintained under an alias, where banks of monitors displayed feeds from every camera he'd secretly installed in his house over the years. He watched Tiffany pace the living room, phone pressed to her ear. Derek, you're scaring me. What do you mean they'll kill you? Through another feed, Blake observed Derek in his Portland apartment, surrounded by the evidence of his beating. A few carefully placed bruises that would heal in days but looked devastating in the moment. These aren't regular guys, Tiff. They're connected to serious people. They know about us, about your husband's money. If I don't give them a way to access his accounts by Saturday. Blake smiled coldly. Saturday was the timeline he'd given them. Just enough pressure to make them reckless, not enough time to think clearly. Okay, Tiffany said, her voice shaking. I'll try to get into Blake's office tomorrow. Maybe I can find something. Tiff, I love you. We're going to get through this. I love you too. Blake muted the feed and picked up his secure phone. Time to accelerate the timeline. The next morning, Tiffany received a call from Blake's attorney, Henry Walsh, actually Blake himself using voice modulation software he'd acquired from his military contractor days. Mrs. Morrison, I'm calling to inform you that your husband has filed for legal separation. He's also initiated proceedings to freeze all marital assets pending a full forensic audit. What? He can't do that. I'm afraid he can, ma'am. Mr. Morrison has presented evidence of adultery and financial misconduct. The judge signed the order this morning. Tiffany's world collapsed around her. Not only was Blake gone with their money, but now she was facing complete financial ruin and a legal battle she couldn't afford. She called Derek immediately. It's over. He's filing for separation, freezing everything. The judge already signed papers. Jesus Christ, Tiff. My deadline is tomorrow night. What are we going to do? Derek had been thinking about this moment all night. Chen's men had been very specific about what would happen if he didn't deliver. They'd shown him photos of previous victims, people who'd owed less money and taken longer to pay. There has to be something in his home office. Documents, account numbers, passwords written down somewhere. Rich guys always have backup plans. Derek, Blake's office is like a vault. Biometric locks, cameras, the works. But you have access, right? You live there. Tiffany hesitated. She'd never actually tried to enter Blake's office without permission. It was his sacred space, and she'd respected that boundary throughout their marriage. I think so. The biometric scanner might still recognize me. Tiff, we don't have a choice. It's either this or... She knew what he wasn't saying. If Derek couldn't pay his debts, he'd disappear, or worse. And she'd be left alone, broke, and facing Blake's legal team without resources to fight back. Okay, I'll try tonight. That evening, Tiffany approached Blake's office door with trembling hands. The biometric scanner beeped softly, and to her surprise, the lock disengaged. Blake had never removed her access. Inside, she found exactly what she'd expected, a sophisticated setup with multiple computers, secure filing cabinets, and enough surveillance equipment to stock a spy movie. What she didn't expect was how neat and organized everything was, as if Blake had prepared for someone to search it. She began with his desk, looking for anything that might indicate where he'd moved their money. In the top drawer, she found a folder labeled Contingency Assets containing what appeared to be offshore account information. Her hands shook as she photographed each document with her phone. This was it. This was what Derek needed to save his life. She was so focused on the documents that she didn't notice the red light on Blake's security camera had changed from amber to green, indicating live transmission. 40 miles away, Blake watched his wife systematically photograph his financial records. But these weren't his real accounts. They were elaborate fakes he'd created specifically for this moment. The account numbers were real, but they led to accounts containing exactly $1 each, maintained by financial institutions that would flag any suspicious activity immediately. Phase 2 complete, Blake murmured to himself. Tiffany finished photographing the documents and carefully returned everything to its original position. She'd done it. She'd found a way to save Derek and secure their future together. What she didn't know was that she'd just handed Blake Morrison all the evidence he needed to destroy them both. The next morning, Derek took the account information to Chen's men, who seemed pleased with his delivery. They promised the debt was forgiven and that he and Tiffany could disappear together as planned. There's just one more thing, Chen said as Derek prepared to leave. Our employer wants to meet with Mrs. Morrison personally, to finalize the arrangement. That wasn't part of the deal. It is now, tonight, 8 p.m., the warehouse where we first met. She comes alone, or the information is useless. Derek's stomach clenched. Something felt wrong, but he was in too deep to back out now. That afternoon, he called Tiffany with the news. They want to meet with you tonight, to make sure the account access works. Derek, I don't like this. Why can't you handle it? Because it's your name on the accounts, not mine. Tiff, we're almost free. One more meeting, and we can disappear together forever. Tiffany looked around the empty mansion that had been her prison of privilege for 12 years. The thought of escaping with Derek, of starting over somewhere Blake could never find them, was intoxicating. Okay, where and when? As the sun set over Seattle, Tiffany Morrison drove toward what she believed was her liberation. In reality, she was driving toward the most carefully orchestrated trap Blake Morrison had ever set. And in a storage facility across town, Blake Morrison put on his tactical gear for the first time in 3 years and checked his weapons. Tonight, the ghost would remind the world why his enemies feared the darkness. Tonight, Tiffany and Derek would learn that some betrayals come with a price that can never be paid. Chapter 4. The Hunter Emerges. At 7:45 p.m., Tiffany Morrison sat in her Mercedes outside the warehouse district, her hands trembling on the steering wheel. The account information she'd stolen from Blake's office was in her purse, along with a pistol she'd taken from his gun safe. A .380 she barely knew how to use, but that made her feel marginally safer. The warehouse Derek had directed her to stood isolated among a row of abandoned buildings, its windows dark and unwelcoming. This was supposed to be her path to freedom, but every instinct screamed danger. She dialed Derek's number one more time. It went straight to voicemail. Inside the warehouse, Derek Hamilton was bound to a chair with zip ties, duct tape covering his mouth, watching three men who definitely weren't the debt collectors he'd been dealing with. These were different, harder, more professional. Military bearing. The leader, a scarred Hispanic man in tactical gear, spoke into a radio. Package is secure. Target approaching. Derek's eyes widened as he realized he'd been played. But by whom? And why? At exactly 8 p.m., Tiffany pushed through the warehouse's side entrance, her heels echoing in the cavernous space. Emergency lighting cast long shadows, and the smell of motor oil and rust filled her nostrils. "Hello," she called out. "I'm here for the meeting." A spotlight blazed to life, blinding her momentarily. When her vision cleared, she saw Derek tied to a chair 30 feet away, three armed men surrounding him. "Mrs. Morrison," a voice called from the shadows. Right on time. The voice was familiar, but wrong somehow, distorted through an electronic modulator. A figure stepped into the light, dressed in black tactical gear, face hidden behind a military-grade mask. "Who are you? What do you want?" "I want to discuss your theft of classified financial information from Blake Morrison's private office." Tiffany's blood turned to ice. "I don't know what you're talking about. The account numbers in your purse say otherwise." The masked figure gestured to one of his men, who approached Tiffany with mechanical precision. "You see, Mrs. Morrison, your husband's business involves some very dangerous people. The kind who don't appreciate security breaches." As the man reached for her purse, Tiffany pulled out the .380, her hands shaking violently. "Stay back. I have a gun." The masked figures didn't even flinch. The leader actually chuckled, a cold, electronic sound. "That's Blake's backup piece. .380 Smith & Wesson bodyguard. 7 rounds, assuming he kept it loaded. Tell me, Tiffany, do you even know how to take the safety off?" Tiffany looked down at the weapon in confusion. There was a switch near the trigger guard, but her hands were shaking too badly to manipulate it properly. "I thought not." The leader nodded to his men. "Disarm her." Before Tiffany could react, the nearest operative had the gun out of her hands and her arms twisted behind her back. She was zip-tied and forced into a chair facing Derek, who was making muffled sounds of terror behind his gag. "Now then," the leader said, settling into a third chair. "Let's discuss what's going to happen next." He pulled out a tablet and swiped through several documents. Photos of Tiffany's break-in, recordings of her conversations with Derek, financial records showing her affair-related expenses. "For 3 months, you've been conducting an extramarital affair while stealing money from your husband to fund it. Hotel rooms, gifts, flights to Portland, all charged to accounts Blake Morrison worked 16-hour days to fill." "Blake left me," Tiffany protested. "He abandoned our marriage." "Did he? Or did he simply refuse to finance your adultery?" The masked figure leaned forward. "You see, Tiffany, your husband is a very thorough man. Every hotel charge, every gift purchase, every airline ticket, he documented everything. He knew about Derek Hamilton before you even reconnected with him." Derek's eyes went wide above his gag. Tiffany stared in shock. "That's impossible. Blake trusted me." "Blake Morrison trusts no one. It's why he's alive and his enemies aren't." The leader gestured to his men again. "Show them the real problem." One of the operatives wheeled out a large monitor displaying what appeared to be a government database. Tiffany's photo appeared alongside Derek's, with red text across both, "Subjects of federal investigation." "The account numbers you stole tonight aren't just Blake's personal assets. They're operational funds for Morrison Security Solutions, a company with contracts throughout the Middle East, Southeast Asia, and Eastern Europe. Some of those contracts are classified. Some involve people who kill entire families for less than what you've done." Tiffany felt her world collapsing. "I didn't know. I never meant." "Intent is irrelevant. You compromised classified financial information. Mr. Hamilton attempted to sell that information to criminal organizations. In the eyes of Blake Morrison's clients, you're both enemy combatants." The leader stood and walked to a wall-mounted weapons rack. He selected a tactical knife with practiced ease. "Fortunately for you, Blake Morrison has requested the opportunity to handle this situation personally." "Blake's here." Tiffany's voice was barely a whisper. "He's been here all along." The masked figure reached up and removed his helmet, revealing the face Tiffany had kissed goodbye 3 days earlier. Blake Morrison looked exactly the same, except for his eyes. They held a coldness she'd never seen before. "Hello, sweetheart," Blake said, his voice now unmodulated and terrifyingly calm. "Enjoying your exploration?" Derek was hyperventilating behind his gag, pulling frantically at his restraints. Tiffany couldn't speak, couldn't breathe, couldn't process what was happening. "You wanted excitement, Tiffany. You wanted to experience life beyond our boring marriage." Blake walked slowly around their chairs, the knife reflecting the harsh warehouse lighting. "I thought I'd give you exactly what you asked for." "Blake, please. I know this looks bad, but I can explain. Can you explain why you were stealing classified financial data to give to criminals?" "Because that's what Derek's new friends are. Organized crime figures with connections to terrorist organizations in 3 countries. Blake gestured to his men, who Derek now realized were actual Morrison security contractors, mercenaries who'd operated in combat zones around the world. Of course, Derek doesn't know that yet. He thinks he's being extorted by local gangsters. He has no idea that by tomorrow morning, his name will be on a federal watch list as a suspected terrorist collaborator. Derek's eyes bulged as the full scope of Blake's plan became clear. This wasn't just revenge, it was complete and total destruction. "As for you, Tiffany," Blake continued, stopping directly in front of his wife, "you're about to discover what happens when someone tries to steal from people who kill for a living." He knelt down until they were eye level. When he spoke, his voice carried the promise of violence that had terrified warlords and cartel bosses. "You wanted to see other men, sweetheart? Tonight, you're going to see exactly what kind of man you married." Chapter 5, The Education. Blake Morrison circled his captives like a predator evaluating prey, the tactical knife spinning lazily in his fingers. The warehouse had been transformed into an interrogation facility, portable lights casting harsh shadows, multiple cameras recording from different angles, and equipment that Tiffany couldn't identify but looked decidedly military. "Before we proceed," Blake said, settling into a chair facing them, "I want you both to understand exactly what you've done. Not just to me personally, but to yourselves." He nodded to Rodriguez, who activated a wall-mounted screen displaying Derek's financial records. Derek Hamilton, 36 years old, failed musician, current debt load of $47,000 to various creditors. Blake's voice carried the clinical detachment of a military briefing. 3 months ago, you were served eviction papers. 1 week later, you renewed contact with my wife through social media. Derek tried to speak through his gag, his eyes desperate. "Oh, you want to explain? You think this was coincidence?" Blake smiled coldly. "Remove his gag." Rodriguez cut the duct tape away. Derek immediately began babbling. "Blake, listen to me. I never meant for any of this to happen. Tiffany reached out to me, not the other way around. I thought she was just an old friend who was married to $30 million. Blake interrupted. "Tell me, Derek, when did you first ask Tiffany about my financial situation?" Derek's face crumpled. I never asked directly. She just started talking about the house, the cars, the trips." "Second date," Blake said matter-of-factly. "You asked if I made her sign a prenup." "Third date, you wondered aloud how much military contractors really make." "By the 4th date, you were helping her research divorce law." Blake gestured to another screen showing printed emails and text messages. "Every conversation, Derek. Every plan you made to take my wife and my money. Did you really think I wouldn't find out?" Tiffany found her voice. "Blake, you're acting like we planned this together from the beginning. I was unhappy. You needed excitement." Blake's attention shifted to his wife. "Let me tell you about excitement, Tiffany." He stood and walked to an equipment case, removing what looked like a modified tablet. "This device contains financial records for Morrison Security Solutions. Real ones, not the fakes you photographed. Our clients include people who make Pablo Escobar look like a Sunday school teacher. The account numbers you stole? They contain operational funds for arms dealers, mercenary companies, and individuals who have killed more people than some small wars." Tiffany's face went white. "You said you ran a security company." "I do. We provide security for people and organizations that can't use legitimate law enforcement. Drug cartels laundering money through offshore banks. African warlords purchasing untraceable weapons. Eastern European crime syndicates moving human trafficking proceeds." Blake's voice remained conversational, which somehow made it more terrifying. "All of them use Morrison Security Solutions for financial protection and transportation logistics." Derek was staring at Blake as if seeing him for the first time. Jesus Christ, you're a criminal. I'm a businessman who serves criminals. There's a difference. Blake returned to his chair. And now both of you have compromised classified information that could expose my clients to federal investigation. He activated another screen showing FBI case files. Derek, your gambling debts weren't to local bookies. They were to a money laundering operation run by Russian nationals. When you tried to sell my account information to pay those debts, you committed federal crimes. Espionage, money laundering, conspiracy to commit terrorism financing. Derek's breathing became rapid and shallow. I didn't know. The guys who came to see me said they were collection agents. They were my employees, following a script I wrote specifically for you. Blake's smile was razor thin. I needed you desperate enough to involve Tiffany in your problems. Desperate enough to convince her to betray me. Tiffany finally understood. This was all a setup. The gambling debts, the threats, the timeline. You orchestrated everything. From the moment you told me you wanted to see other men, I knew you'd already been seeing Derek. So I created a scenario where your affair would destroy you both. Blake leaned forward. You wanted excitement, Tiffany. How's this for exciting? He gestured to Rodriguez, who wheeled out another piece of equipment, a large plastic tub filled with water and connected to electrical cables. Derek immediately began struggling against his restraints. Oh God, no. Blake, please. I'll disappear. I'll never contact Tiffany again. I'll do whatever you want. What I want, Blake said, his voice dropping to a whisper, is for you to understand what happens to people who try to steal from me. He picked up the electrical cables, their copper and sparking slightly. Military interrogation techniques, Derek. Very effective for extracting information or ensuring compliance. Blake tested the voltage, and a blue arc jumped between the wires. Of course, at this voltage, it's not just painful, it's potentially lethal. Tiffany was crying now, mascara streaming down her face. Blake, we're married. You can't do this to me. I'm your wife. Were you my wife when you were fucking Derek in hotel rooms? Were you my wife when you stole classified information from my office? Blake's calm facade cracked slightly, revealing the rage beneath. You stopped being my wife the moment you betrayed me. He moved toward Derek with the electrical cables. Blake, stop. Tiffany screamed. I'll do anything. I'll disappear. I'll sign papers saying I never saw anything. Just don't hurt him. Blake paused. Anything. Yes. Anything. Blake set down the cables and returned to his chair. Call your sister in Phoenix. Tell her you're visiting for a few weeks. Make it sound natural. Tiffany fumbled for her phone with shaking hands. Her sister Carol answered on the second ring. Carol? It's me. I was wondering if I could come visit for a while. Blake and I are having some problems, and I need to get away. Blake monitored the conversation, ensuring Tiffany followed his unspoken script. She arranged to arrive in Phoenix the next day, telling Carol she'd be staying indefinitely. When she hung up, Blake nodded approvingly. Very good. Now Derek's turn. Derek's voice was hoarse with fear. What do you want me to do? Call your landlord. Tell him you're moving out immediately. Emergency family situation. Derek made the call, his voice shaking but believable. Blake collected both phones. Excellent. Now we can proceed to the final phase. Final phase. Tiffany whispered. Blake stood and began pacing again, his movements predatory and controlled. You see, Tiffany, I could kill you both right now. Make it look like a murder-suicide. Jealous lover kills his married girlfriend, then himself. Very tidy, very believable. Derek whimpered. Tiffany closed her eyes, accepting her fate. But that would be wasteful, Blake continued. You both betrayed me, but you can still be useful. He stopped pacing and smiled. The same smile Tiffany had fallen in love with 12 years ago, now transformed into something predatory. Instead, I'm going to give you exactly what you wanted. You'll disappear together, just like you planned. You'll have freedom, adventure, excitement, everything you said our marriage lacked. Blake walked to a wall safe and removed 2 passports and a thick envelope. New identities, $10,000 cash, and bus tickets to Mexico. Congratulations, you're now criminals fleeing the country together. Tiffany stared at the documents in confusion. I don't understand. Tomorrow morning, federal agents will raid Derek's apartment and this warehouse. They'll find evidence of terrorist financing, money laundering, and conspiracy to commit espionage. They'll discover that Tiffany Morrison and Derek Hamilton are fugitives who fled to avoid prosecution. Blake's smile widened as understanding dawned on their faces. You'll spend the rest of your lives running from federal agents, organized crime figures, and anyone else who might recognize you. No credit cards, no bank accounts, no contact with friends or family. Just the two of you, on the run forever. He gestured to Rodriguez, who began cutting their restraints. But Blake, Tiffany said desperately, what about us? What about our marriage? Blake Morrison looked at his wife of 12 years, the woman he'd loved, protected, and provided for, and felt nothing but cold satisfaction. There is no us, Tiffany. There never will be again. As Rodriguez freed them, Blake added one final detail that sent chills down both their spines. Oh, and just so we're clear, if you ever try to contact me, return to the United States, or interfere with my life in any way, I'll activate certain protocols that will ensure you both disappear permanently. He moved close enough that they could smell his cologne, the same scent Tiffany had loved for over a decade. Have a wonderful life together. I hope it's everything you dreamed it would be. Chapter 6. The Vanishing Act. Dawn broke over Seattle as Blake Morrison sat in his office, watching live feeds from multiple surveillance cameras. On one screen, Tiffany and Derek stumbled out of the warehouse, clutching their fake documents and cash. On another, FBI agents prepared for coordinated raids that would find exactly what Blake wanted them to find. The beauty of the plan wasn't just in its complexity, it was in its simplicity. Every piece of evidence pointed to a real crime. The account information Tiffany had stolen was genuine, even if the accounts were empty. Derek's attempts to sell classified financial data were documented through multiple sources. Both of them had committed actual federal crimes. Blake's phone buzzed with a text from Rodriguez. Packages delivered. Both buses departed on schedule. Surveillance teams in position. Blake smiled and activated a secure video call with Agent Sarah Chun of the FBI's Financial Crimes Division, a woman who owed Morrison Security Solutions several significant favors. Agent Chun, I need to report a security breach. What kind of breach, Blake? My wife and her lover stole classified financial information from my company and attempted to sell it to organized crime figures. I have video evidence, financial records, and recorded conversations. Chen's expression grew serious. Blake, that's a federal matter. Why didn't you report this through official channels? Because I wanted to give you the chance to handle it quietly, before other agencies get involved. Blake knew exactly which pressure points to push. The information they stole involves operations in Syria, Afghanistan, and Eastern Europe. If this goes public, send me everything. How much of a head start do they have? They're currently on buses heading toward the Mexican border. New identities, cash, the full fugitive package. Blake transmitted a data packet containing carefully edited evidence. I estimate 6 hours before they reached the crossing at Tijuana. Chun reviewed the files in real time, her face growing more concerned with each document. Jesus, Blake. This is espionage-level stuff. Why would your wife? Revenge. I filed for separation when I discovered the affair. She decided to take me down with her. Within an hour, federal agents raided Derek's Portland apartment, finding exactly what Blake had planted there. Printed copies of the classified financial data, maps of border crossings, and a detailed plan for selling information to Mexican crime syndicates. The raid on the warehouse yielded even more evidence, surveillance equipment, weapons, and communications gear that painted a picture of an organized criminal operation. By noon, Tiffany Morrison and Derek Hamilton were federal fugitives with their photos on every FBI watch list between Seattle and Mexico City. But Blake's plan went deeper than simple law enforcement. 300 miles south, Tiffany and Derek sat in a grimy bus station in Sacramento, counting their remaining cash and studying the fake passports Blake had provided. Rachel Collins and David Martinez. Derek read from his new identification. Think these will work at the border? Tiffany, now Rachel, was staring at a television screen showing their photos on CNN. The caption read, Federal fugitives sought in terrorism financing case. We're on the news, she whispered. Derek looked up to see their faces displayed for the entire bus station. A reporter was explaining how they'd stolen classified information from a defense contractor and attempted to sell it to terrorist organizations. We need to get out of here, Derek said, grabbing their single bag. But as they stood to leave, Derek noticed something that made his blood turn cold. Two men in the corner of the station were watching them, speaking quietly into earpieces. "Tiff, Rachel, we've got company." The men weren't law enforcement. They looked like the type of people Blake Morrison dealt with. Hard, professional, military-bearing. And they were moving toward the exit to cut off any escape route. Derek grabbed Tiffany's hand and pulled her toward the bathroom area, where a service corridor led to the rear of the building. They slipped through an emergency exit, setting off an alarm, and ran into the Sacramento afternoon. What they didn't know was that Blake had teams like this positioned at every major transportation hub between Seattle and the Mexican border. Not to capture them, to ensure they kept running. In his Seattle office, Blake tracked their progress through a network of surveillance assets that spanned 3 countries. Every time Tiffany and Derek tried to rest, mysterious figures would appear, forcing them to keep moving. Within 48 hours, they'd abandoned the bus route entirely and were hitchhiking through Central California, sleeping in drainage ditches, and stealing food from convenience stores. The $10,000 Blake had given them was running out fast. Hotels were too dangerous, and they needed cash for transportation. By the 3rd day, they'd reached the outskirts of Los Angeles, exhausted and desperate. Derek had developed a persistent cough from sleeping outdoors, and Tiffany's carefully maintained appearance had dissolved into something barely recognizable. They took shelter in an abandoned warehouse, where Tiffany finally broke down. "This isn't what you promised me," she sobbed, her voice echoing in the empty space. "You said we'd be free. You said we'd be together." Derek tried to comfort her, but his own terror was overwhelming. "Baby, we just need to get across the border. Once we're in Mexico, we can disappear." "How? We don't speak Spanish. We don't know anyone. We're going to die out here." Derek had been thinking the same thing, but he couldn't admit it. Every time they stopped, those men appeared. Every time they tried to use credit cards or phones, federal agents seemed to materialize. It was like they were being herded toward some specific destination. That night, while Tiffany slept fitfully on a pile of cardboard, Derek made a decision that would seal both their fates. He found a working payphone and dialed Blake Morrison's private number. "Derek," Blake answered on the first ring, as if he'd been expecting the call. "How's the honeymoon going?" "Blake, please. Tiffany's sick. We can't keep running like this." "Then stop running. You know we can't. Those men you sent." "What men, Derek?" "I sent you to Mexico with new identities and cash. If you're having problems, that's your own incompetence." Derek realized Blake was recording the conversation, ensuring that any admission of guilt came from Derek himself. "Blake, I'm begging you. Let Tiffany go. She doesn't deserve this." "Doesn't deserve what?" "The freedom she asked for? The excitement she craved?" Blake's voice carried cold amusement. "You're both getting exactly what you wanted. This isn't freedom. This is hell. Welcome to the real world, Derek. This is what life looks like for people who steal from men like me." The line went dead. Derek stood at the payphone for a long time, finally understanding the full scope of Blake's revenge. They weren't just running from the law. They were trapped in a maze designed specifically for them, with Blake controlling every exit. When he returned to the warehouse, Tiffany was awake, staring at nothing. "I called him," Derek admitted. "I called Blake." Tiffany didn't even look surprised. "What did he say?" "He said we're getting exactly what we wanted." They sat in silence as the sun rose over Los Angeles. Two people who had destroyed their lives for an affair that now felt like it had happened to different people. Neither of them noticed the surveillance camera Blake had installed in the warehouse the day before, or the fact that their location was being transmitted in real time to contacts throughout the criminal underworld. Blake Morrison was teaching them a lesson that would last whatever remained of their lives. Some betrayals echo forever. And the echo was just beginning to crescendo. Chapter 7. The Reckoning Begins. 3 weeks into their flight, Tiffany and Derek crouched in a drainage tunnel outside Tijuana, Mexico, their clothes filthy and their faces gaunt from hunger. The border was less than 2 miles away, but it might as well have been on the moon. Blake's surveillance network had tracked them to every hiding place, forced them from every shelter, and made every moment of their existence a nightmare of paranoia and desperation. They'd learned to recognize the signs: men in tactical clothing appearing at rest stops, unmarked cars following their stolen vehicles, hotel clerks making suspicious phone calls. "We can't cross at the main checkpoint," Derek whispered, studying the border fence through a pair of binoculars he'd stolen from a sporting goods store. "Too much security." Tiffany was beyond caring about security. She'd lost 30 pounds. Her hair was falling out from stress, and she hadn't slept more than 2 consecutive hours and days. Maybe we should turn ourselves in, she said for the 100th time. Federal prison has to be better than this. No. Derek's voice carried the desperation of a man who'd seen what federal authorities did to accused terrorists. They'll put us in solitary for the rest of our lives. At least out here, we have a chance. What Derek didn't know was that Blake Morrison was currently meeting with Agent Sarah Chun in a secure conference room in downtown Seattle, reviewing footage of their fugitives' latest movements. They're trying to cross through the drug tunnels, Chun reported. Our assets in Mexico report they've made contact with coyotes near Tijuana. Blake nodded with satisfaction. Perfect. Activate the final protocol. Blake, are you sure about this? Once we involve the cartels. The cartels have been involved since day one. They just didn't know it. Blake activated a secure communication channel. Everything is proceeding exactly as planned. In Mexico, Tiffany and Derek had indeed made contact with human smugglers, men who promised safe passage across the border for $5,000 each. It was more money than they had, but the smugglers offered an alternative arrangement. You work for us, the lead coyote explained in broken English. 1 month. Then we take you across. Derek studied the man's face, trying to read his intentions. What kind of work? Transport. You carry packages. We give you food, shelter, protection. Derek knew they were talking about drug running, but alternatives were limited. They could try to cross the desert alone and probably die of exposure, or they could take their chances with the cartels. 1 month, Derek agreed. Then we're free. The coyote smiled, and Derek felt a chill that had nothing to do with the desert wind. What Derek didn't realize was that the coyote was actually Miguel Santos, a Morrison Security Solutions asset who'd been operating in Mexico for 3 years. The packages they'd be carrying weren't drugs. They were tracking devices that would allow Blake to monitor their exact location at all times. For the next 2 weeks, Tiffany and Derek carried mysterious packages across the desert, sleeping in safe houses controlled by people who watched their every movement. They were fed just enough to keep them functional, given just enough rest to prevent collapse. Derek began to suspect they were being prepared for something more than simple border crossing. The training they received was too intensive, too specific. They learned routes through the desert, memorized safe house locations, and practiced evading border patrol surveillance. They're turning us into smugglers, Tiffany realized during one of their rare private conversations. We're not customers, we're assets. Derek had reached the same conclusion. Once we cross the border, we'll be completely dependent on them. They'll own us. But they were trapped in a system designed by Blake Morrison to ensure they had no alternatives. Every escape route led back to the same network of criminals. Every safe house was monitored by the same organization. That night, Derek made his second critical mistake. He attempted to steal a vehicle from the cartel compound, thinking he and Tiffany could drive north and surrender to American authorities. But the vehicle was equipped with tracking devices, and within an hour, they were surrounded by armed men in the desert. Miguel Santos was not pleased. You were told to follow instructions, he said, gesturing for his men to restrain Derek. Now you learn what happens to people who steal from us. They dragged Derek to a wooden post and tied his hands above his head. Miguel produced a cattle prod and activated it, electricity crackling in the night air. Please, Tiffany begged. We'll do whatever you want. Just don't hurt him. You will do whatever we want, Miguel agreed. But first, you learn respect. The cattle prod touched Derek's ribs, and his scream echoed across the desert. Tiffany collapsed, sobbing, as Miguel continued the lesson for 30 minutes. When it was over, Derek hung unconscious from his restraints, his body covered in burn marks. Tomorrow, you both cross the border, Miguel announced. You will carry special packages to Los Angeles. If you succeed, you work for us. If you fail, he gestured to Derek's unconscious form. If you fail, your boyfriend learns what real pain feels like. That night, Tiffany sat beside Derek as he drifted in and out of consciousness, and finally understood the true scope of Blake's revenge. They weren't just fugitives, they were slaves. Blake had sold them to people who would use them until they died, and there was no escape. 3,000 miles away, Blake Morrison reviewed surveillance footage of the evening's events with clinical detachment. Phase 3 was complete. Tiffany and Derek were now completely broken, completely dependent on criminal organizations for survival. But Blake's plan required one final element. He activated a secure phone and dialed a number in Colombia. Ramirez? It's Morrison. The American packages are ready for shipment. Yes, both of them. No, they don't know what they're carrying. Perfect. The buyers in Los Angeles are expecting delivery within 72 hours. Blake ended the call and opened a bottle of 20-year-old scotch. Tomorrow, Tiffany and Derek would unknowingly carry 20 pounds of pure Colombian cocaine across the U.S. border. When they were arrested, and they would be arrested, they'd face federal drug trafficking charges that carried mandatory life sentences. But even that wasn't the end of Blake's plan. The real buyers waiting in Los Angeles weren't drug dealers. They were federal agents who would arrest Tiffany and Derek for drug trafficking while simultaneously seizing evidence of their earlier espionage activities. Tiffany Morrison and Derek Hamilton would spend the rest of their lives in federal supermax prisons, never understanding that every step of their journey had been orchestrated by the man they'd betrayed. Blake Morrison raised his glass in a silent toast to the wife who'd wanted excitement and the lover who'd wanted money. Tomorrow, they'd get more of both than they'd ever bargained for. Chapter 8. The Final Descent. The U.S.-Mexico border crossing at dawn was a maze of concrete barriers, razor wire, and surveillance technology. Tiffany and Derek stumbled through the desert carrying backpacks that weighed 40 pounds each, their contents unknown but certainly illegal. Miguel Santos had been very specific about their instructions. Follow the designated route, avoid border patrol sensors, deliver the packages to an address in downtown Los Angeles, and wait for further orders. Failure meant a slow death in the desert. What they didn't know was that every step of their route was being monitored by thermal imaging satellites controlled by Blake Morrison's private intelligence network. Every border patrol agent they avoided, every sensor they circumvented, every safe house they reached, all of it choreographed by the man they'd betrayed. "Stop," Derek whispered, crouching behind a cluster of desert brush. Movement ahead. Through the pre-dawn gloom, they could see flashlights sweeping the terrain 200 yards ahead. Border Patrol agents conducting their morning sweep. "We're supposed to be past this point before sunrise," Tiffany said, checking the GPS device Miguel had given them. "If we're caught here." Derek knew what would happen. Miguel had shown them videos of previous smugglers who'd been captured by American authorities and then retrieved by cartel assets. The footage was educational in the most horrific way possible. They waited in the brush until the patrol passed, then sprinted across open ground toward a drainage culvert that would take them under the border highway. The backpacks felt heavier with each step, and Derek was beginning to suspect they contained more than just drugs. In a surveillance center in Seattle, Blake Morrison watched their progress through multiple camera feeds. Agent Sarah Chun sat beside him, coordinating with federal agencies on both sides of the border. "They're 12 minutes behind schedule," Chun observed. "Think they'll make the pickup point?" "They'll make it," Blake said with certainty. "They're too terrified to fail." Blake activated a secure communication channel. "Ramirez, confirm package contents one more time. 20 pounds Colombian cocaine, street value approximately $2 million. Plus your special edition." Blake's special edition was a GPS tracking device that would allow federal agents to monitor Tiffany and Derek's exact location until the moment of arrest. But more importantly, it contained a digital storage device with complete records of their original espionage activities, evidence that would ensure their prosecution for both drug trafficking and terrorism financing. Perfect. Initiate arrest protocol when they reached the delivery address. By midday, Tiffany and Derek had reached the outskirts of Los Angeles, exhausted and dehydrated, but still carrying their mysterious cargo. The delivery address was a warehouse in the industrial district, exactly the kind of place where drug deals happened in movies. "This feels wrong," Tiffany said as they approached the building. "Why would smugglers use such an obvious location?" Derek was thinking the same thing, but they had no choice. Miguel's men were probably watching from somewhere nearby, and failure to complete the delivery meant certain death. The warehouse door was unlocked. Inside, they found a single man waiting, someone who looked more like an accountant than a drug dealer. "Ms. Collins and Mr. Martinez," the man said, using their false identities. "Right on time." He gestured for them to place the backpacks on a nearby table, then began examining the contents with electronic equipment that seemed far too sophisticated for a drug transaction. Excellent quality, he announced after several minutes. The buyers will be very pleased. As he spoke, Derek noticed something that made his heart stop. The man was wearing a wire, a small device clipped to his shirt collar that clearly contained a microphone and transmitter. "Run," Derek whispered to Tiffany. But it was too late. The warehouse doors burst open, and federal agents flooded the space, weapons drawn and tactical gear gleaming. FBI. Nobody moved. Tiffany and Derek were on the ground in seconds, their hands zip-tied behind their backs while agents secured the scene. The buyer was actually Agent Sarah Chun, and the warehouse was an FBI sting operation. "Tiffany Morrison and Derek Hamilton," Chun announced formally, "you're under arrest for drug trafficking, conspiracy to distribute controlled substances, money laundering, and violation of the Espionage Act." As they read their rights, Derek finally understood the full scope of Blake's revenge. This wasn't just about catching them. It was about ensuring they'd never be free again. The backpacks contained enough cocaine to trigger mandatory life sentences under federal drug laws. But worse, the digital device Blake had hidden in the drugs contained complete records of their original theft of classified information. They weren't just drug smugglers. They were terrorists who'd used drug proceeds to finance espionage activities. In his Seattle office, Blake Morrison watched the arrest through live satellite feeds, a slight smile playing across his lips. Phase 4 was complete. But Blake's plan had one final component. That evening, as Tiffany and Derek sat in federal holding cells awaiting arraignment, Blake made a series of phone calls to very specific people. "Judge Harrison? Blake Morrison. I need to discuss the Morrison-Hamilton case that's coming before your court." "Yes, I understand they're both American citizens." "No, I'm not asking for special treatment. I'm asking you to follow the law exactly as written." Blake's second call was to the federal prosecutor assigned to the case. "Mr. Walsh, I'm calling to offer Morrison Security Solutions full cooperation in the prosecution of my wife and her co-conspirator. Yes, we have additional evidence. Financial records, surveillance footage, recorded conversations. Everything you need for maximum sentences." His third call was to the warden of ADX Florence, the federal supermax prison where the most dangerous criminals in America were held. "Warden Mitchell, Blake Morrison. I wanted to discuss security protocols for 2 incoming inmates." "Yes, I understand they're not typical supermax candidates. However, given their knowledge of classified operations and their connections to international criminal organizations." By midnight, Blake had ensured that Tiffany Morrison and Derek Hamilton would spend the rest of their lives in solitary confinement, 23 hours a day, with no contact with the outside world. But even that wasn't enough. Blake's final move was a masterstroke of psychological warfare. He arranged for both Tiffany and Derek to receive a single piece of mail each week, photographs of their former lives. Pictures of the mansion Tiffany had lived in, the restaurants where she'd dined, the luxury vacations she'd taken. For Derek, photographs of the music venues where he'd played, the freedom he'd once taken for granted, the simple pleasures of a normal life. Each photograph would be accompanied by a single sentence. "Thinking of you both." Blake Morrison had given them exactly what they'd asked for. They'd wanted excitement, and now they'd have the excitement of wondering whether each day would be their last. They'd wanted to be together, and now they'd spend eternity knowing the other was suffering in a cell just like theirs. But most importantly, they'd learned the lesson Blake Morrison taught all his enemies. Betrayal has consequences that echo through generations. As he sat in his empty mansion that night, Blake Morrison felt something he hadn't experienced in months: peace. Justice had been served with the precision of a military operation and the finality of a death sentence. Tiffany and Derek were gone, but they weren't dead. They were living in a hell Blake had designed specifically for them, with no possibility of escape, no hope of redemption, and no end to their suffering. Blake Morrison had kept his promise. He'd given them exactly what they'd wanted, and he'd made sure they'd regret it forever. Chapter 9. The Ghost's Final Victory. 2 years later, Blake Morrison stood in the conference room of Morrison Security Solutions, addressing a room full of international clients. His company had expanded dramatically since the security breach that had eliminated his wife and her lover, a cautionary tale that had actually enhanced his reputation among people who valued absolute loyalty. "Gentlemen," Blake said, gesturing to a wall-mounted screen displaying global operations, Morrison Security Solutions now operates in 47 countries, with assets protecting over $200 billion in client investments. The assembled warlords, cartel leaders, and arms dealers nodded approvingly. Blake Morrison had become a legend in their circles, a man who'd turned personal betrayal into a business advantage, demonstrating the kind of ruthless efficiency they respected above all else. Agent Sarah Chun watched from the back of the room, her FBI credentials meaningless in this gathering of criminals who were technically Blake's clients, not targets. The relationship between Morrison Security and federal law enforcement had evolved into something mutually beneficial. Blake provided intelligence on international threats, and authorities looked the other way regarding his client base. After the meeting ended and the clients departed, Chen approached Blake's desk. "Congratulations on the expansion," she said. "I assume business is good?" "Business is excellent." Blake's smile was genuine but cold. "Amazing how much trust you can build by demonstrating what happens to people who break that trust." Chen had been monitoring Tiffany and Derek's situation since their arrests. Both were serving life sentences without possibility of parole in ADX Florence, the federal supermax prison known as the Alcatraz of the Rockies. They lived in 7 by 12-foot concrete cells, allowed out for 1 hour of exercise per day, with no contact with each other or the outside world. "They still receive your weekly photographs?" Chen mentioned. "Do they?" Blake seemed genuinely curious. "I'd forgotten about that." It was a lie, and they both knew it. Blake Morrison forgot nothing, especially when it came to his enemies. The photographs were carefully chosen to maximize psychological impact. Images of freedom, happiness, and normalcy that served as constant reminders of what Tiffany and Derek had lost forever. "Any regrets?" Chen asked. Blake considered the question seriously. "Regrets suggest I would do something differently given the chance. I gave them exactly what they asked for. They wanted excitement. Life in Supermax is certainly exciting. They wanted to be together. They're in the same facility, knowing the other is suffering just like them. They wanted to explore relationships. They've had 2 years to explore their relationship with complete isolation." Chen nodded, understanding that Blake Morrison was incapable of genuine remorse. He'd spent 10 years building an empire, 12 years building a marriage, and 2 years destroying the people who'd threatened both. In his mind, justice had been served with mathematical precision. "What's next for you?" Chen asked. Blake activated a secure tablet displaying his personal calendar. "Morrison Security Solutions is expanding into South America next month. New clients, new challenges, new opportunities to demonstrate our commitment to absolute loyalty." As Chen prepared to leave, Blake's assistant announced a visitor, a young woman in her 20s with blonde hair and an expensive business suit. "Mr. Morrison? I'm Jessica Caldwell, Tiffany's younger sister. I was hoping we could talk." Chen remained in the room, sensing this conversation might be relevant to her ongoing monitoring of Blake's activities. Jessica Caldwell looked nervous but determined. "I know what happened between you and my sister. I know she betrayed you, and I know she's in prison because of it." Blake's expression didn't change. "Your sister made choices that had consequences. I had nothing to do with her criminal activities. I'm not here to blame you. I'm here to apologize." Jessica's voice was steady despite her obvious fear. "Tiffany was always selfish, always looking for the easy way out. What she did to you was wrong." Blake studied the young woman carefully. Jessica Caldwell was everything Tiffany had once been: beautiful, ambitious, hungry for success. But there was something else in her eyes: intelligence tempered by caution, ambition balanced by respect. "Why are you here, Miss Caldwell?" "I graduate from business school next month. I've been following Morrison Security Solutions for 2 years, studying your expansion strategy, your client development model, your operational security protocols." Jessica stepped closer to Blake's desk. "I want to work for you." Agent Chen's eyebrows rose slightly. This was an unexpected development. Blake leaned back in his chair, intrigued despite himself. "You want to work for the man who destroyed your sister's life. I want to work for the man who built a global empire from nothing, who commands absolute loyalty from the most dangerous people in the world, who never makes the same mistake twice." Jessica's voice carried conviction. "My sister was an idiot. You gave her everything she could want, and she threw it away for a loser musician and some momentary excitement." Blake was quiet for a long moment, processing this unexpected turn. Jessica Caldwell represented an interesting opportunity, someone with a personal connection to his greatest triumph, someone who understood the cost of betrayal better than anyone. What makes you think I'd trust anyone related to Tiffany Morrison? Because I'm not my sister. And because you're the kind of man who turns enemies into advantages. Jessica placed a portfolio on Blake's desk. MBA from Wharton, specializing in international finance and security operations. Fluent in 4 languages, including Russian and Mandarin. And I've spent 2 years learning everything I could about your business. Blake opened the portfolio and reviewed Jessica's credentials. Her academic record was flawless. Her recommendations were from people Blake respected, and her thesis had been on private military contracting in unstable regions, essentially a detailed analysis of his own business model. You understand what working for Morrison Security Solutions entails. I understand that your clients are criminals, that your operations exist in legal gray areas, and that loyalty is the only currency that matters. Jessica met his gaze without flinching. I also understand that you've built something unprecedented, and I want to be part of it. Blake made his decision with the same cold calculation he applied to all strategic choices. Trial period. 6 months. You'll start in financial operations, handling client accounts for our Eastern European assets. One mistake, one moment of disloyalty, one hint that you're anything like your sister, and you'll join her in federal prison. Jessica's smile was brilliant and predatory. I won't disappoint you, Mr. Morrison. As she left the office, Agent Chun remained behind. Hiring your ex-wife's sister? Chun shook her head. That's either brilliant or insane. Blake Morrison looked out at the Seattle skyline, watching evening shadows fall across the city he'd come to dominate. Jessica Caldwell understands something her sister never did, that betrayal has consequences that extend beyond the betrayer. She's seen what happens to people who cross me. That makes her more valuable than a dozen strangers who've only heard stories. Blake's smile was razor-thin as he contemplated the elegant symmetry of his latest move. He destroyed Tiffany Morrison and Derek Hamilton so completely that even their families now served his interests. Jessica Caldwell would become one of his most trusted lieutenants, and every day she worked for him would be another reminder to the world that Blake Morrison's reach extended across generations. Besides, Blake added, Jessica has something her sister never possessed: respect for power and the intelligence to serve it rather than challenge it. Agent Chun left the office thinking about the man she'd been monitoring for 2 years. Blake Morrison had transformed personal betrayal into professional advantage, turning his greatest weakness into his greatest strength. He'd eliminated his enemies so thoroughly that their own family members now sought his approval. As the sun set over Seattle, Blake Morrison sat alone in his office, reviewing global operations that spanned continents and commanded resources that rivaled small nations. He'd built an empire through violence, maintained it through fear, and expanded it through calculated brutality. But most importantly, he'd proven that some men were too dangerous to betray and too powerful to escape. Somewhere in Colorado, Tiffany Morrison sat in her concrete cell, staring at this week's photograph, an image of Blake and Jessica Caldwell shaking hands in his office, with a caption that read, "The family business continues." Derek Hamilton received the same photograph in his cell 3 floors below, understanding that even Tiffany's family had abandoned her for the man who'd destroyed them both. Blake Morrison had given them exactly what they'd asked for, and made sure they'd spend eternity regretting it. The ghost had claimed his final victory, and the echo of their betrayal would haunt them until they died in their concrete tombs, forgotten by the world, but never forgotten by the man who'd orchestrated their destruction. Blake Morrison had proven that some lessons last forever, and some vengeance transcends time itself. In the end, he'd given them exactly what they deserved: each other, forever, in hell. And there you have it. Another story comes to an end. What did you think? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoy this story, consider joining our community by subscribing. It means the world to us. For more stories like this one, check out the recommended videos on screen. And I'll see you there. Subscribe to Infidelity Tales Lab for more stories. Now let's begin this one. Chapter 1. The Perfect Life. Nathan Oliver stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows of his downtown office, watching the evening traffic crawl through the city streets below. At 38, he'd built everything he'd ever wanted: a successful career as the district attorney's lead prosecutor, a beautiful home in the suburbs, and a marriage that had survived the brutal hours his job demanded. His phone buzzed. A text from Kathy, his wife of 12 years. Working late again? There's lasagna in the fridge. Love you. Nathan smiled, typing back quickly before returning to the case files spread across his mahogany desk. The Roman Sweeney case. It should have been straightforward. A wealthy real estate developer accused of murdering his business partner, Theodore Curran, over a failed shopping mall development. The evidence was circumstantial but damning. Sweeney's DNA under the victim's fingernails, his car spotted near the crime scene, threatening emails exchanged in the weeks before Curran's death. What made it strange was Sweeney himself. Nathan had prosecuted dozens of murderers. Some proclaimed innocence with tears and rage. Others, the truly guilty ones, hired expensive lawyers and fought every charge with procedural motions and character witnesses. Roman Sweeney did neither. He sat through the trial with an almost serene expression, his lawyer, a public defender named Jesse Skinner, struggling to mount any real defense. Sweeney refused to take the stand. He refused to provide an alibi. When Skinner tried to question the DNA evidence's chain of custody, Sweeney actually leaned over and whispered something that made his own lawyer go quiet. Nathan had prosecuted the case aggressively, laying out a narrative of greed and violence that convinced the jury in less than 4 hours. The death penalty followed. Virginia still executed prisoners, and Theodore Curran's widow had testified with such raw grief that even the most liberal jury members couldn't deny her justice. That was 3 years ago. Tomorrow, Roman Sweeney would die. Nathan gathered his files, shut down his computer, and headed home. The drive took 40 minutes through suburbs that gradually became more affluent. His house, a 2-story colonial with white pillars, sat on a quiet cul-de-sac. Kathy's SUV was in the driveway. He found her in the kitchen, pouring herself a glass of wine. Even after 12 years, she could still make his breath catch. Tall and elegant, with dark hair that fell past her shoulders, Kathy Oliver had been an art gallery manager when they met. Now she ran her own interior design business, though Nathan noticed she'd been taking fewer clients lately. "Hey, stranger," she said, smiling but not quite meeting his eyes. "How was your day?" "Long. The Sweeney execution is tomorrow." Nathan loosened his tie, grabbing a beer from the fridge. "I always hate the execution days. Do you ever wonder if you got it wrong?" Kathy asked, her voice careful. Nathan looked at her, surprised by the question. "About Sweeney?" "No. The evidence was solid. He was guilty, but he never defended himself. Don't you think that's strange? Some people accept their fate. Or maybe he just knew there was no way out." Nathan took a long drink. "Why the sudden interest?" Kathy shrugged, turning away. "Just seems sad, that's all. Someone dying tomorrow." They ate dinner in relative silence, the television filling the void with mindless noise. Nathan tried to remember the last time they'd really talked. Not about schedules or bills, but about life, dreams, the things that had made them fall in love. After dinner, Kathy claimed a headache and went upstairs early. Nathan stayed down, nursing another beer and flipping through case notes he'd read 100 times. Something nagged at him about the Sweeney case had nagged at him for 3 years, but he couldn't articulate what. The perfect conviction had felt too easy. Chapter 2. The Execution. Greensville Correctional Center squatted like a concrete tombstone against a gray Virginia morning. Nathan arrived at 8, 2 hours before the scheduled execution. As the prosecutor who'd won the conviction, he was expected to witness. The warden, a grizzled veteran named Wilson Daniels, met him at the entrance. "Oliver, thought you might not show." "I always show," Nathan said. It was true. He believed in accountability, his own as much as the condemned's. They went through security, past guards with dead eyes who'd seen too many men die. The execution chamber was sterile and cold, with a gurney visible through reinforced glass. A handful of witnesses were already present. Theodore Curran's widow, Elvira Curran, her face hardened by 3 years of grief, 2 reporters, and Jesse Skinner, Sweeney's public defender, who looked like he hadn't slept in days. "He asked to see you," Skinner said quietly to Nathan. Before they bring him in, Nathan frowned. That's unusual. Everything about this case has been unusual, counselor. You know that. Against his better judgment, Nathan followed a guard to a small viewing room. Roman Sweeney sat on the other side of bulletproof glass, wearing prison whites, his hands cuffed. At 43, he'd aged dramatically since the trial. Gray hair, deep lines around his eyes, but that unsettling calm remained. Mr. Oliver, Sweeney said, his voice crackling through the intercom. Thank you for coming. You wanted to see me? I wanted to tell you something. In my cell, there's a box. Small, cardboard, addressed to you. The warden has already cleared it. Sweeney's lips curved into something that wasn't quite a smile. When you open it, you'll understand why I never defended myself. Nathan felt ice in his veins. What's in the box? The truth. Everything you think you know about me, about Theodore Curran, about your perfect conviction, it's wrong. Or rather, it's only half the story. Sweeney leaned forward. I'm guilty, Nathan. Don't misunderstand that. But not of what you think. Then why not defend yourself? Why go to your death for something you didn't do? Because some things are worth dying for. And some people deserve to think they've won. Sweeney's smile widened. You'll see. Open the box, Nathan. Then decide if justice was really served. The guard's signal time was up. Nathan stood, his mind racing with questions. But Sweeney had already turned away, peaceful and resigned. 10:15 a.m. Roman Sweeney was strapped to the gurney. The warden asked for last words. I have no regrets, Sweeney said, looking directly at Nathan through the glass. Remember the box, prosecutor. Remember what I gave up. The chemicals flowed. Sweeney's eyes closed. 3 minutes later, the doctor pronounced him dead. Nathan stumbled out of the viewing room, past Elvira Curran, who was sobbing in relief, past reporters already typing on their phones. He found Warden Daniels in his office. The box Sweeney mentioned. I need it. Daniels retrieved a small cardboard package from his safe, sealed with evidence tape. Already logged it out. It's yours. Nathan took it to his car, his hands shaking. The box was light, maybe a pound. His name was written in Sweeney's neat handwriting across the top. He drove to a rest stop off I-95, parked in the far corner of the lot, and opened the box. Inside were 3 items: a burner phone, a USB drive, and a handwritten letter. Nathan read the letter first. Dear Nathan, by the time you read this, I'll be dead. You convicted me of murdering Theodore Curran, and you believed you were serving justice. You weren't. Theodore Curran is very much alive, living under the name Saul Riggs in Charleston, South Carolina. The body you found? A drifter named Owen Sawyer we paid to stage his own death. The DNA under his fingernails? Mine, from a staged fight weeks earlier. But that's not the important part. The important part is why we faked Theodore's death. It wasn't about money or business. It was about her. Your wife, Kathy. She and Theodore have been lovers for 5 years. They planned it all, the fake death, framing me, even the emotional testimony from Elvira Curran, who's actually Theodore's sister, Janet Valentine. I loved Kathy once too, before you. She promised me the world, then left me for you when your career took off. Theodore came after me. The 3 of them hatched this plan, get me convicted and executed, collect on Theodore's life insurance, and live happily ever after. They picked murder because they knew it would be death penalty eligible. They wanted me dead. The USB contains video recordings of their planning sessions, financial transfers, and explicit footage of Kathy and Theodore together. The phone has text messages spanning years. I could have defended myself. I could have exposed them. But I realized something better. I could give you the gift I never got. The truth. I'm dying anyway, Nathan. Terminal cancer. 6 months, maybe. So I made a choice. I took their punishment, let them think they'd won, and gave you the weapon to destroy them. You're a good man, Nathan. Better than me. You deserve to know who you've been sleeping next to for 12 years. What you do with this information is up to you. But know that Theodore Curran is guilty of far more than faking his death. The USB will show you crimes that would put him away for life. Trafficking, extortion, real murders. He's been operating through shell companies under his new identity. Kathy knew everything. She helped. I'm guilty of many things, but not of taking Theodore's life. Still, I accept my fate. Consider this my final act of revenge. Not against you, but against them. Roman Sweeney. Nathan sat in his car, the letter trembling in his hands, his entire world fracturing around him. 12 years. 5 of them a lie. He plugged the USB into his laptop, and the files opened like doors to hell. Chapter 3. The Unraveling. Nathan watched every video, read every document, traced every financial transaction. Hours passed in that parking lot, the afternoon fading to evening, his coffee growing cold, his phone buzzing with missed calls from Kathy he couldn't bring himself to answer. The evidence was devastating and meticulous. Video from 4 months before the murder. Kathy, Theodore, and a woman Nathan now knew was Janet Valentine, sitting in a hotel room planning every detail. Kathy's voice, bright and animated, suggesting they use Roman because he's still pathetically in love with me. He'll be an easy target. Financial records showing Theodore Curran had indeed taken out a massive life insurance policy, but not for Elvira. The beneficiary was a shell company traced back to Kathy through 3 offshore accounts. Photos of Owen Sawyer, the homeless drifter they'd paid $50,000 to play a corpse. Medical examiners' reports Nathan had never questioned, now obviously forged. The victim's dental records matched Sawyer's from a free clinic in Richmond, not Curran's expensive dentist in Fairfax. And the explicit videos of Kathy with Theodore, time-stamped and geotagged, some as recent as 2 weeks ago. Hotels, their house, when Nathan worked late, even the back seat of Theodore's BMW in their own driveway. Nathan's hands clenched into fists. The betrayal felt physical, a burning coal in his chest. But beneath the pain, something colder emerged. Calculation. Roman Sweeney had handed him a gift, yes, but also a challenge. What would Nathan do with the truth? The prosecutor in him wanted to march straight to the police, have them all arrested. But Nathan was smart enough to see the complications. He'd been the prosecutor on the original case. Any revelation that it was all fabricated would destroy his career, possibly land him in legal jeopardy for prosecutorial misconduct, even if he'd been duped. The state had executed an innocent man, technically, since Sweeney hadn't murdered Curran, based on evidence Nathan had presented. His reputation would be annihilated. Every case he'd ever won would be questioned. Defense attorneys would have a field day, and Theodore Curran, living free under a new identity, would hire the best lawyers money could buy. With Sweeney dead and Nathan's credibility destroyed, they might actually walk. No, the legal system had already failed. It was time for something else. Nathan Oliver had spent 15 years putting criminals behind bars through legal means. He knew the law inside and out, which meant he also knew exactly how to operate outside it. He drove home at 9 p.m., his mind eerily calm. The house was dark except for the living room. Kathy sat on the couch, wine glass in hand, some reality show playing on mute. You finally answer your phone, and it's just to say you'll be late, she said, irritation in her voice. The execution was this morning, Nathan. Where have you been? He looked at her, really looked at her, and saw a stranger. How had he missed it? The small signs he dismissed as work stress or natural drift. The way she'd stopped asking about his cases. The mysterious girls' weekends every month. The new lingerie he'd assumed was for him. I had some things to think about, Nathan said evenly. The execution was strange. Sweeney said something to me before he died. He watched her face carefully. A flicker of concern, quickly masked. Oh, what did he say? Nothing important. Just the ramblings of a guilty man. Nathan walked to the kitchen, poured himself a drink. I'm exhausted. I'm going to bed. Nathan. Kathy followed him. Are you okay? You seem off. He turned, gave her his best tired smile. Just a hard day, honey. Watching someone die never gets easier. She hugged him, and it took every ounce of Nathan's control not to recoil. Her perfume, expensive, something she'd started wearing about 3 years ago, smelled like betrayal. I love you, she whispered. I love you too, he lied. That night, sleeping beside her for the last time, Nathan Oliver made his decision. Roman Sweeney had given him the evidence, but Nathan would write the ending. And unlike the legal system with its rules and procedures and rights for the accused, Nathan's justice would be absolute. They wanted him to be the fool, the cuckolded husband who'd unknowingly helped them murder an innocent man. Instead, he'd be their nightmare. Chapter 4. Building the Case. Nathan took a personal leave from the DA's office, 3 weeks, citing emotional stress from the execution. His boss, a veteran prosecutor named Ed Wilkinson, granted it immediately. "You've been pushing yourself too hard, Oliver. Take time. Decompress." If only Ed knew what Nathan was really planning. The first step was confirming everything in Sweeney's evidence. As much as Nathan wanted to believe it all, he was a prosecutor. He knew evidence could be fabricated, manipulated. He needed independent verification. He started with Theodore Curran, now Saul Riggs. The USB contained an address in Charleston, 1847, Trad Street, a historic district property worth over $1 million. Nathan drove down, checked into a hotel under a fake name, and began surveillance. The man who emerged from the house 3 days into the stakeout was unmistakably Theodore Curran. Older, with a beard and glasses, but the same tall frame, the same confident stride. Nathan photographed him, followed him to a yacht club where Saul Riggs was apparently a member, tracked him to business meetings downtown. Curran's new identity was well-constructed. Business licenses for an import-export company, tax returns, even a lease on the Trad Street property. Someone had done professional work. Nathan suspected Janet Valentine, who according to Sweeney's files had connections to forgers and identity specialists from her time working in crisis management for wealthy clients. Over a week, Nathan documented Curran's routines. Morning coffee at a bakery on King Street, gym 3 times weekly, business meetings at various hotels and offices. But most importantly, Nathan tracked his communications. Using equipment he'd confiscated from previous cases, technically illegal for personal use. But Nathan was past caring about technicalities. He cloned Curran's phone and intercepted his messages. Jackpot! Theodore was in constant contact with Kathy, though they used burner phones and code names. Elaine, Kathy, and Marcus, Theodore, discussed finances, expressed their love, and occasionally mentioned the payout, presumably the life insurance money they were still waiting to collect. Apparently, there was a mandatory waiting period and investigation for death penalty cases. But there was something else in the messages. Something darker. Theodore referenced merchandise shipments and clients in Miami. He mentioned needing to clean up the Sawyer problem. Owen Sawyer, the homeless man they'd used as a corpse. Nathan dug deeper into the financial records on the USB. Theodore Curran, operating as Saul Riggs, was running a human trafficking operation. Young women from Eastern Europe, brought into Charleston through his import company, then distributed to various clients along the East Coast. Roman had mentioned this in his letter, real crimes, real victims. Nathan felt the weight of it. He'd spent his career prosecuting men like Curran, and here he'd been sleeping next to his accomplice. One of the financial documents showed payments to a J. Valentine for consultation services. Nathan decided his next stop was finding Janet Valentine. Chapter 5. The Sister's Secret. Janet Valentine proved harder to track than Theodore. After the trial, Elvira Curran had collected sympathy and attention as the grieving widow, given interviews about justice and closure. Then she'd vanished. Nathan used his prosecutorial access. He still had clearance during his leave to pull records. Janet Valentine had a history. Arrests for fraud in her 20s, dismissed charges of insurance scams, connections to organized crime in Atlantic City. She cleaned up her act publicly around the time she'd taken on the Elvira Curran identity, but her past painted a picture of a professional con artist. He found her in Richmond, ironically less than 2 hours from where she'd testified at Roman Sweeney's trial. She was living under yet another name, Hope Johns, running a grief counseling service for crime victims. The audacity was stunning. Nathan approached it differently with Janet. He couldn't surveil her the same way. She was too cautious, too trained in spotting tails. Instead, he used a different tactic. He hired Brett Davidson, a private investigator he'd worked with on previous cases. Brett was ex-FBI, morally flexible and discreet. Nathan gave him Janet's photo and current address. I need everything on her. Finances, contacts, activities, vulnerabilities. Don't approach her. Just observe and document. Brett delivered within 5 days. Janet Valentine was deeply in debt. Her grief counseling service was a front. She barely saw clients. She was gambling badly at a casino in Charles City. She'd racked up $70,000 in markers she couldn't pay. The casino, Nathan learned, was owned by some very unforgiving people. She was also still in contact with Theodore and Kathy, though less frequently. Brett had recorded a phone conversation where Janet demanded more money, threatening to tell everything if they didn't pay her debts. Leverage. Nathan smiled, but he needed more than just the 3 conspirators. Roman's evidence showed a network. The doctors who'd falsified autopsy reports, the witnesses who'd provided false testimony about seeing Roman near the crime scene, the insurance investigators who'd been paid to expedite Theodore's death claim. Nathan spent 2 weeks methodically identifying each player. Dr. Alan Redd, the medical examiner who'd signed off on Owen Sawyer's body as Theodore Currence. Ron Hudson and Wayne Dawson, 2 men who'd testified they'd seen Roman's car near the supposed murder location. Barb Rollins, the insurance agent processing the death benefit claim. Each had received payments from shell companies Nathan traced back to Theodore's network. Each was complicit, and each would face Nathan's justice. One afternoon, Nathan received a call from Kathy. He'd been avoiding her, claiming he was working through things and needed space. She'd been understanding at first, but now her patience was wearing thin. Nathan, this is ridiculous. You've barely been home in 2 weeks. What's going on? I told you I need time. Time for what? You're being weird and distant. Are you seeing someone? Her voice carried an almost amusing irony. I'm working on something. A project. I'll be home soon, I promise. After he hung up, Nathan stared at his phone. The performance was exhausting, pretending everything was normal. But he needed more time. The plan, crystallizing in his mind, required perfect timing. Roman Sweeney had given him the evidence. Now Nathan needed to become judge, jury, and executioner. But unlike Roman, Nathan wasn't going to accept defeat. He was going to make them all pay, legally impossible to prosecute without destroying himself, but not impossible to punish. Nathan thought about his years as a prosecutor. He'd always believed in the system, in justice through proper channels. But the system had executed an innocent man while real criminals walked free. Roman had seen that, had made the ultimate sacrifice to expose it. Now it was Nathan's turn. He would honor Roman's gift by doing what the law couldn't. Destroy them all. Chapter 6. The trap is set. Nathan returned to Charleston with a plan that would have terrified the man he'd been a month ago. But grief, betrayal, and rage had transformed him into something else. Something colder. Something dangerous. Phase 1. Theodore Current. Nathan had spent 3 weeks learning everything about Theodore's operation. The trafficking network operated through a front company, Riggs Import and Maritime. Young women arrived in shipping containers labeled as textile samples, were processed through a warehouse near the port, then distributed to various buyers. It was efficient, brutal, and had been operating for at least 3 years, meaning Kathy had known about it the entire time. Nathan made copies of everything on Roman's USB, encrypted them, and sent them to 3 separate secure locations. Insurance. Then he hacked into Theodore's business email. The password was embarrassingly simple, Kathy 2019, and began drafting messages. The first email went to Theodore's primary client, a man in Miami who apparently purchased women regularly. Nathan, posing as Theodore, dramatically increased the prices and changed delivery terms to cash only, no electronic trail. The second email went to Theodore's supplier in Moldova, claiming the FBI was investigating and they needed to halt all shipments immediately. The third email, sent from a separate anonymous account, went to the Charleston Police Department's Human Trafficking Task Force. It contained limited information, just enough to make them start watching Riggs Import and Maritime, but not enough to raid. Not yet. Nathan wanted Theodore paranoid, scrambling, making mistakes. Phase 2. Janet Valentine. Nathan drove to Charles City and entered the casino where Janet had accumulated her debts. He found the casino manager, a hard-eyed man named Darren Pace who'd served time for assault before going semi-legitimate in the gambling business. "I want to pay off someone's markers," Nathan said, sliding a briefcase across the desk. Pace raised an eyebrow. "That's unusual." "Who?" "Hope Johns. I believe she owes you about $70,000. $73,500, Pace corrected, plus interest. Call it 80 even. And you are someone who wants a favor in return." Nathan opened the briefcase, showing cash. "I pay her debt. You tell her the debt is cleared, but she needs to call this number within 24 hours. Say it's about her brother." "Her brother's dead?" Pace said. "Supposedly." "Exactly." Nathan smiled. The next day, Janet called the number, a burner phone Nathan had purchased specifically for this. He disguised his voice slightly, added a hint of Southern accent. "Ms. Valentine, or should I say Ms. Johns? We need to talk about Theodore." "Who is this?" "Someone who knows what you did. Someone who knows about Owen Sawyer, about the trial, about everything. And someone who's willing to offer you a deal." Silence. "Then what kind of deal?" "Your freedom for your testimony. I have evidence that will send Theodore and Kathy to prison for life. But I need you to fill in the gaps, testify to the planning, the execution. Do that and you walk. Refuse, and I hand everything to the police with you named as a co-conspirator. The casino debt? Consider it a down payment on your cooperation. I need to think about it. You have 48 hours. After that, the deal expires." Nathan hung up. Janet would flip. He knew her type, self-preservation over loyalty. She'd been threatening Theodore and Kathy for more money anyway. This just gave her a better option. Phase 3, the evidence network. Nathan couldn't prosecute the others directly, Dr. Red, Ron Hudson, Wayne Dawson, Barb Rollins, without exposing the entire conspiracy and his own unwitting role. But he could make their lives very difficult. For Dr. Reed, Nathan sent anonymous complaints to the state medical board, detailing irregularities in death certificates. He included just enough specific examples, not mentioning the current case, to trigger an investigation. For Hudson and Dawson, the false witnesses, Nathan did something more creative. He hired Brett Davidson to approach them separately, posing as a documentary filmmaker, making a show about wrongful convictions, and wanted to interview witnesses from questionable cases. Brett was wired. If either man admitted to lying on the stand, even partially, Nathan would have evidence for perjury charges. Hudson cracked in the first interview, bragging drunk about how he'd been paid to remember seeing things for various trials. Brett got it all on tape. For Barb Rollins, the insurance agent, Nathan went directly to her employer, a major national insurance company. He sent anonymous evidence of her accepting bribes to expedite false claims. The company launched an internal investigation within days. Each piece was moving into position, but Nathan saved his most carefully planned revenge for last. Phase 4, Kathy. He returned home after 3 weeks, playing the role of a husband who'd worked through his execution trauma. Kathy greeted him with what looked like genuine relief. "Nathan, God, I was so worried. You were gone so long." "I know. I'm sorry. I just needed to clear my head." He hugged her, smelled Theodore on her skin, fought down the rage. "But I'm back now. And actually, I have a surprise for you." "A surprise?" "I've been doing some thinking about us. About our marriage. We've been drifting, and that's my fault. So I booked us a trip. Charleston. This weekend. A bed and breakfast in the historic district. Just you and me, reconnecting." He watched her face carefully. A flicker of panic, quickly hidden. "Charleston? That's sweet, but I have clients this weekend. Cancel them. Please. This is important to me." She hesitated, calculating, probably trying to figure out if it was coincidence or if Nathan somehow knew. But she'd been playing this role for 5 years. She smiled, touched his face. "Okay. Charleston sounds perfect." Nathan smiled back and began the final countdown. Chapter 7, The Weekend in Charleston. The bed and breakfast was on Church Street, 3 blocks from Theodore's house on Trad. Nathan had chosen it deliberately. He'd also hired Brett Davidson and 2 other associates to maintain surveillance on Theodore's residence all weekend. Kathy was nervous. Nathan could see it in the way she checked her phone constantly, the tight smile she wore as they walked through Charleston's historic streets Friday evening. "Everything okay?" he asked over dinner at a waterfront restaurant. "Fine. Just work stuff. Turn the phone off. Just for tonight. Please." She did, reluctantly. Saturday morning, Nathan woke early. Kathy was still sleeping, her phone on the nightstand. He'd already installed spyware on it weeks ago, but he took a photo of her sleeping peacefully, the last peaceful moment she'd have. "I'm going for a run," he whispered. She murmured something incoherent. Nathan ran straight to Theodore's house. Brett was parked across the street in a surveillance van disguised as a plumber's truck. Status: target's inside. Alone. Been making calls all morning. Seems agitated. Good. Stay here. Things are about to get interesting. Nathan ran back to the bed and breakfast, showered, and woke Kathy with coffee. "I thought we could walk around, visit some galleries. Isn't there one you've mentioned before on King Street?" "Sure," Kathy said too quickly. They spent the day playing tourist. Kathy seemed to relax slightly, believing maybe Nathan really was just trying to reconnect. They had lunch at a cafe, visited a museum, walked along the waterfront. As sunset approached, Nathan steered them toward Trad Street. "The architecture here is amazing," he said casually. "Look at these houses." They walked past Theodore's address. Nathan saw Kathy's eyes flick toward it, saw her swallow hard. "You okay? You look pale. Just tired. Maybe we should head back. In a minute. I want to show you something." Nathan pulled out his phone, opened a photo gallery, and showed her a picture he'd taken that morning. It was Theodore leaving his house. Kathy stopped walking, her face drained of all color. "Nathan, that's Theodore Curran," Nathan said calmly. "Or as he's calling himself now, Saul Riggs. Living 3 blocks from where we're staying. What a strange coincidence. I don't know what." "Don't." Nathan's voice turned cold. "Don't insult me by lying now. I know everything, Kathy. About you and Theodore. About Roman Sweeney. About Owen Sawyer. About the fake murder and the trial and the execution of an innocent man." She stared at him, and he watched her mind race through options. Denial? Confession? "How long have you known?" she finally whispered. "Roman told me. Right before he died. He left me a box with all the evidence. Videos of you 3 planning everything. Financial records. Text messages. Everything." Tears formed in Kathy's eyes. "Nathan, please, let me explain." "Explain what? That you've been fucking another man for 5 years? That you helped frame someone for murder? That you were willing to let me convict an innocent man so you could collect insurance money?" Nathan's voice rose despite himself. "That you're married to a monster who traffics human beings, and you've known about it the whole time?" "Trafficking?" She looked genuinely confused. "What are you talking about?" "Theodore's import business. It's a front for human trafficking. You didn't know?" Nathan laughed bitterly. "My God, Kathy, you helped fake a man's death, but you drew the line at knowing about the trafficking? How noble." "I need to sit down," she said weakly. "No, you need to come with me." Nathan gripped her arm, not hard enough to hurt, but firmly enough she couldn't easily break away. "We're going to visit Theodore. Right now. The 3 of us are going to have a conversation." "Nathan, please, you don't understand. Move, or I call the police right here, right now, and you get arrested in public." She moved. Chapter 8. The Confrontation. Theodore opened the door with a drink in his hand, clearly not expecting visitors. When he saw Nathan and Kathy, the glass slipped from his fingers and shattered on the hardwood floor. "Hello, Theodore," Nathan said pleasantly, pushing past him into the house. "Or should I call you Saul? Nice place. The afterlife treats you well." Theodore recovered quickly. Nathan had to give him credit. "I don't know what you think you're doing, but this is breaking and entering. Please, save it." Nathan pulled out his phone, played a video. It was Theodore and Kathy in a hotel room, discussing the Sweeney problem and how they'd manipulate the evidence. Theodore's voice was clear. "The prosecutor's an idealist. He'll believe whatever we show him because he wants to believe in justice." The blood drained from Theodore's face. "Sit down," Nathan said. "Both of you. We're going to talk about justice. Real justice." They sat on an expensive leather couch. Nathan remained standing, pacing like he did in courtrooms when he was building toward a closing argument. Roman Sweeney was innocent of your murder, Theodore, because you're not dead. But he was guilty of loving the wrong woman. Nathan glanced at Kathy, who was crying silently. He had terminal cancer, 6 months to live. So he made a choice. He took your fall, let himself be executed. Also, he could give me the truth. What do you want? Theodore asked. His voice was steady, but Nathan saw fear in his eyes. What do I want? That's the question, isn't it? The prosecutor and me wants to haul you both to the police station right now. But that gets complicated. I'd have to admit I convicted an innocent man. My career would be destroyed. Every case I've won would be questioned. The state would face massive liability for a wrongful execution. Nathan leaned against the wall. And you'd hire expensive lawyers. You'd fight for years. Maybe you'd even beat some of the charges. After all, Roman's dead. Owen Sawyer's ashes were scattered. The evidence could be questioned. So what then? Kathy whispered. So I did what you taught me, Nathan said, looking at her. I thought outside the law. I became creative. And I realized the law isn't the only kind of justice. He pulled out a laptop, set it on the coffee table, and opened files. Theodore, your trafficking operation is about to collapse. I've sent evidence to the FBI, Interpol, and local police. By Monday morning, federal agents will raid your warehouse. Your suppliers have been warned off. Your clients think you're a snitch. Even if you run right now, they'll find you. Theodore's face went gray. Kathy, the life insurance claim you've been waiting on? It's been red flagged for fraud. When Theodore gets arrested for trafficking, investigators will look into his death more closely. They'll discover Owen Sawyer's real identity. You'll be charged with insurance fraud, conspiracy to commit murder, and accessory to human trafficking. You can't do this, Theodore said, but there was no conviction in his voice. I already have. Janet Valentine, Theodore's sister, your co-conspirator, has agreed to testify against both of you in exchange for immunity. The medical examiner who falsified the autopsy is under investigation. Your false witnesses have been recorded admitting to perjury. Every person you roped into this is turning on you. Nathan closed the laptop. You wanted to play games with the justice system? Congratulations. You won that round. Roman Sweeney died. But now it's my turn, and I play to win. What do you want from us? Kathy asked again, her voice breaking. Nathan, please, I'm your wife. You were my wife, Nathan said coldly. Now you're just a criminal who happened to share my bed. What do I want? I want you to know what's coming. I want you to feel the fear Roman felt when he was strapped to that gurney. I want you to spend every remaining free moment dreading the knock on the door. He walked to the exit, paused. You wanted me to be the fool, the stupid prosecutor you manipulated. But Roman gave me something better than revenge. He gave me the truth, and the truth is going to destroy you both. Nathan left them sitting there, stunned and terrified, and walked out into the Charleston night. Chapter 9. Justice Served. Monday morning, the raids happened exactly as Nathan had orchestrated. FBI agents, working with Charleston PD and Homeland Security, descended on Riggs Import and Maritime. They found 3 women locked in a back warehouse room, all under 25, all from Moldova. They found records of dozens more. They found bank accounts, shell companies, and communications with buyers. Theodore Curran, Saul Riggs, was arrested at his home. By noon, every news station in the Southeast was covering the story of the dead man who'd been running a trafficking ring. The investigation naturally expanded. When police started looking into Theodore's supposed death, they discovered the inconsistencies. Dental records that didn't quite match. A body that had been cremated suspiciously quickly. Anonymous tips from Nathan pointed them toward Owen Sawyer's real identity. Janet Valentine, as promised, provided detailed testimony about the conspiracy. She described the planning meetings, the payments, the deliberate framing of Roman Sweeney. She gave them Kathy's involvement, the insurance scheme, everything. Kathy was arrested Wednesday at their home. Nathan wasn't there. He'd moved out over the weekend, taken a temporary apartment downtown. He watched the news coverage with grim satisfaction. His phone rang. Ed Wilkinson. Nathan, Jesus Christ. Have you seen the news about the Sweeney case? I have. This is a disaster. We executed an innocent man. The governor's office is calling. The AG wants a full review of your cases. I know, Ed. I'm prepared for it. I was manipulated by sophisticated criminals. I presented the evidence in good faith. Every step I took was procedurally correct based on what I knew at the time. There was a pause. You sound different. Calm. I've had time to process it. I'll cooperate fully with any investigation. But Ed, they framed an innocent man and got him executed. That's on them, not on me. The press is going to crucify you. Let them. I'll survive. And when this is done, I'll go back to putting criminals away. Real criminals this time. The following weeks were brutal. Nathan endured investigations, media scrutiny, and public criticism. But he'd been careful. Everything he'd done as a prosecutor had been by the book. He'd been a victim of the conspiracy, not a participant. Roman Sweeney's name was posthumously cleared. The governor issued a formal apology. Victim advocates called for reforms. Theodore Kern was charged with human trafficking, fraud, conspiracy, and a dozen other crimes. His trafficking network led to arrests in 5 states. He was facing life without parole. Kathy Oliver was charged with conspiracy to commit fraud, accessory to trafficking, and obstruction of justice. Her lawyers tried to paint her as another victim, manipulated by Theodore, but Janet's testimony and the videos of Kathy enthusiastically planning the frame job destroyed that defense. Dr. Alan Reed lost his medical license. Ron Hudson and Wayne Dawson were charged with perjury. Barb Rollins was fired and indicted for insurance fraud. One by one, everyone involved in the conspiracy faced consequences. 6 months after the Charleston confrontation, Nathan sat in a courtroom, not as the prosecutor this time, but as a witness. Theodore's trial. He took the stand and described opening Roman's box, discovering the evidence, realizing he'd been used. Theodore stared at him from the defense table with pure hatred. When the jury came back, guilty on all counts, Nathan felt something close to peace. After the verdict, Nathan visited Roman Sweeney's grave. It was in a small cemetery outside Richmond, a simple headstone that read, Roman Sweeney.